also think it's going to be a bit of a stretch to find things to keep on saying about points of information that long. 150 minutes. I need to find 150 different things I can say about it. So, what we're going to do is we're going to break it up a little. We're going to talk for about 45, 50 minutes. As you know, my lecture style is very much open forum, so ask questions, put your hands up, listen to each other's questions. If somebody asks me a question, I'd like it if you allow me to respond rather than jumping in with an answer, unless I say who wants to answer that, that would be good. And then we'll have a little break, and then we'll come back and we'll do some drills and exercises to hopefully illustrate what we've talked about in the previous hour. Okay? Is everybody happy with that? Right. Well, points of information, as the title suggests, we're going to talk about what is a point of information. We're going to talk about when you should make or take a point of information. We're going to talk about why points of information are important, not just in world schools debating. Originally, a lot of high school debating, as you know from Bayana's lectures, was done on different national styles. And some of those styles didn't include points of information. The one style that has always had the point of information as a central part of it is the British parliamentary style, which, like most things British, is obviously better than other nations' versions. No, that's not true. But it is something that we like about British parliamentary debating, and it's the one major element that we took from the British style when we made this amalgamated international style for world schools. So we're going to talk about why they're important. And then we're going to talk about how we make points of information. We're going to talk about good and bad points of information, both in the style that they're made, and in their effectiveness, and in the way they're treated. We're going to talk about whether the point of information is legitimate or not. We're going to talk about different ways that you can't make a point of information that judges will not like, will not give you credit for, and may actively deduct marks from you for doing so, okay? Because you have to be pretty strict with things like this. And then we're going to deal with this last one, which I call, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Which I will tell you now is always a bad thing to say. Who here has said that so far in some of the debates when a point of information has been offered? Who's asked the person to say it again? Don't. Okay?
What if you really just didn't know?
Wait until we get there, but I'm just saying don't. I'll explain why, but just don't. Okay, so what is a point of information? Brendan?
There's two explanations I could give. One, the more technical definition, and one sort of more of a sarcasm. But
I'll try the technical one first, and then we'll see if we want the sarcasm.
All right. The first, the real point of information is when someone interrupts, when someone asks a question during your speech, and wants to get more information out of you, or wants to ask a question about what you're saying.
It's an interruption in your speech, isn't it? It's somebody standing up and saying, whoa, slow down there, cowboy. What did you just say? Well, what now? But that's not how you're going to do it. But that's what it is. It's a full interjection. It's possibly because you haven't been clear about something and the person asking the point of information wants, as you said, more information. But more often than that, is it really genuinely a request for information? Alex?
It's a question or a statement designed to throw the speaker off or to show the judges that the speaker is currently wrong or thinking wrong in a way that you show the flaws of his speech to the audience.
Yeah. You question the current argumentation. You don't sort of go back to, in the first minute of your speech you said, and we'll talk about why you don't do that later, but you question the current argumentation, either because you genuinely think the speaker isn't being clear, so you're not sure what position you're rebutting, or because you want to wrest control away from them. You want to make them go off the track they're on and deal with something that you want to introduce into the debate. Why else? Or what else can a point of information be? Sorry, I jumped a while there, a little precipitous.
Time taker.
Time taker. It eats up some of your opponent's time. Could it also be a way of introducing an argument that you want to build on later?
Yeah, sort of stating a rebuttal.
Absolutely. Particularly in the British parliamentary format, which, as you know, is slightly different, where you have two teams on each side of the debate. If you're the second opposition team, you want to try and pinch arguments that the first opposition team are likely to make. So if you can get that argument in with a point of information, and then the other opposition team stands up and develops that point, you're still going to get some credit for having brought that argument to the table. Okay? Now in world schools, it's not so focused on that. So it's a formal interjection, a way of taking control away from the speaker, making the speech from the floor, a way of throwing them off track, a way of putting them on the defensive. Good point of information should always make the speaker go, hang on a minute, I've got to deal with this. Okay? So that's what it is. It's pretty clear what it is. And I don't think there's much confusion about what it is and what it isn't. We want to briefly go over what it's not. Okay? What isn't a point of information?
Well, sort of like a little diatribe, trying to make your own little speech, and
Yeah.
sort of.
It's not an opportunity for you to make a speech. Okay? In world schools, in university debating as well, the better judges will strictly control the time you are allowed to make your point. 15 seconds.
You're supposed to tell the asking person that she's over time as a judge, or is it my role to tell them?
If you're the person accepting the point, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, sort of how we deal with points of information. As soon as you feel you've heard enough, say, thank you, I've got your point, please sit down. But the judge should also be keeping time. 15 seconds is more than enough to make a point of information. If you can't make a point of information in 15 seconds, you need to rethink your point of information. Okay?
Well, because Brianna was saying that it's the role of the speaker to control the time and stop him, that she can say
It is, generally speaking, but there are some judges who feel, particularly chair judges, and some of them very experienced. Very good friend of mine, a chap called Ian Leeson, who's a debate coach at Vermont in California. He actually counts out seconds with his hand. When he gets to 15, he'll say time and make the person offering the point sit down. I like that. Some judges think it should be just down to the speaker and it's not their job to interfere with the control of the speech. It might be a good idea if you check with your judges whether they're going to control time on points of information as well as on speeches. But generally speaking, yes, you should feel able to be in control of your speech even when accepting points of information. You should be able to say to people, I've heard enough, thank you. Okay? What else isn't it? Hmm? Well, that's more about effective and non-effective points of information, but I'm thinking specifically about what you don't do.
Well, I shouldn't just shout out whatever comes into my mind. It should be at least with some intention to lead somewhere,
Yeah.
to point to something.
Yeah, it's not you just shouting out from your chair. It's not heckling or barracking. Okay? Everybody knows what a heckle is?
Yeah, when you're
Like when the audience shouts out when you're on stage. So that's not legitimate, ever. And that will be marked, or that will be seen very, very seriously by judges as unfair on the speaker. And you won't get any credit, and you may actively lose marks if you start to do things like that. Fortunately, nobody has done anything like that so far. I mean, not to my knowledge. Does anybody want to be brave enough to admit that they have? No.
Like, would that just be like saying up to me like you're stupid or something?
Or not even standing up. I've had some debaters do that.
Oh.
Like in the debate, the person's speaking, and you'll get somebody go, huh, that's a retarded argument. Well, fine. Stand up and say that when you get a chance to stand up and speak, you know? But I don't want to hear that coming from the floor. So be very, very careful about, when we say it's an interjection, that's only part of it. It's a major part of it, but the other part is it's a formal interjection. Just like there are formalities in the substantive speech, we require parliamentary language to be used. We require certain formalities. You refer to the opposition or the opposing side. You don't refer to those retards over there, the people who came to the debate on the special yellow bus. You don't make comments like that, okay? So just as there are formalities with the substantive speech, there are also formalities governing what a point of information is. We're going to talk a little bit more about the formalities, as I said, when we get onto legitimacy of POIs. Because there are different ways you can introduce your point, or ask the speaker if you may make a point, some of which are perfectly acceptable. And there's not just one right way of doing it. Some of them are clearly unacceptable, and we'll talk about those as well. Right. So, that's given us a pretty clear idea then of what a point of information is, and a little bit about the purpose of it. When do we make points of information?
When the speaker says something that you either want clarification, or you'd like to add bring a point to them so that they can address it, or ask a question to set up information for a rebuttal later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of those. What else?
When a speaker looks particularly weak on an issue.
Absolutely right. When you sense that somebody's not 100% confident about their data or their argument, when they're slightly hesitant, when they seem to be running out of things to say and looking at the clock thinking, how much time do I have left? You're much more likely to get accepted if you offer a point then, because they're going to be, oh yeah, thank you, fill my time. We know that there are certain times when we can't make points of information, right? When is that?
First person, last person.
And
Reply speech.
and in the reply speech. No points of information in the reply speech. First minute and last minute. Listen clearly for time signals, don't jump the gun. But also accept that your timekeeper or your judge can actually be a human being and make mistakes. I've done it sometimes over the past few days where, because I've been watching the argument being made and trying to note down the argument being made, I've not been able to keep an eye on the stopwatch right next to you. So I might be 5 or 6, or sometimes even 10 seconds late, giving that time signal. It's always a good idea for you as the opposing team to keep a timer going so that you know when the minute is up. If you haven't heard a time signal, don't assume that the judge has forgotten, but look to the judge and say, you know, can I get up? Is that okay? That might cause the judge to go, oh yeah, sorry. You know, the judge will appreciate that. But always keep a timer going. Speakers, you should always keep a timer going as well. That's going to help you with the structure of your speech when you want to move on from your rebuttal to your substantive argument. But it's also going to help you know when you might want to take a point of information. How many points of information should we take in an 8-minute speech? 2 or 3. More than 3, you're probably giving away too much control and too much time. Fewer than 2, and it's always fewer, it's never less. Okay? Everybody knows the distinction between fewer and less?
Yeah, I guess I do.
Less cake, fewer cakes. That's a good way of remembering it. Okay? So fewer than 2 points of information, you're possibly not showing enough engagement with the other side, enough willingness to have your arguments questioned. And that's an important part of debate. That's why it's not public speaking. Okay? You don't get to stand on a podium above everybody else and say, look upon my works, ye mighty and despair. Because you are not Ozymandias, King of Kings, okay? It's one of my favourite poems by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Right. So when we make a point of information, first of all, we have stricture on the time we can make a point of information. We've only got a 6-minute window. And similarly, you've only got a 6-minute window as a speaker when you can accept those points of information. Keeping a timer handy will help you with that, because you know that you want to space out those points of information. Don't take both points of information at 1:30 and then at 1:40. And then, right, that's it, I've taken my 2, I'm not going to take any more. I've actually heard debaters say that as well. They'll take a point of, as soon as the bang goes, somebody will jump up thinking, I've got to show I'm really eager to make a point. They get accepted, and then the person point blank refuses to take any more points of information. And it's like, no, I've taken a point. I'm not going to take any more. You might as well all stay sitting. And they actually tell debaters there's no point even offering a point of information. Is that fair? Is that legitimate?
No.
No, of course it's not. You can't tell the other team not to get on their feet. You can refuse them every time they do. But if you say, I've taken a point, I'm not going to take any more, that's not good style, that's not good strategy, and that's saying to the judge, I know the rules of the game, but I'm only going to do what I have to do because the rules say so. I'm not buying into the spirit of the game. Okay? So don't do that. I often say to people that it's a good idea to try and offer a point of information early on. Not necessarily sort of be hovering. You see some debaters do this, they'll be looking at the judge, waiting for the bang. As soon as the bang goes, it's like the start of the 100 meters at the Olympics. They're all up. And I swear to God, some of them are on performance-enhancing drugs. Because they're up so quickly, it's almost like they're anticipating, they're watching the hand going down. And they're there. And it's like, wow. You should always stand when you make a point of information. And we'll talk about why later in the how. But you should always stand up. Never sort of sit there and go, waving at something, pointing in the distance. There's something hazy over there. Great. But it's important that you stand, and it's important that you're clear when you're making a point of information. But as we heard from Brendan, when the speaker seems hesitant about an argument, that's often a good time. Should you be making points of information constantly all the way through the speech?
No.
Yes.
Well,
We might,
what do you
but
mean, like,
Hang on. Who said no? Why not?
Because you have also to be paying attention to what is being said. I don't know, I mean, you have to take notes, you have to do other things. Even if you're a third speaker, you have to develop your own speech.
You've got to spend time noting down what's being said. It's very hard to write when your hand's in the air like this. You could try it, but if you're standing up, you're going to hold a book and a pen in one hand, put your other hand in the air, how are you going to write? It would be pretty hard to do. The other thing about constantly offering points of information, are you really listening to the arguments being made, or are you just trying to interrupt?
Standing up frequently might be seen as lacking some strategy.
No. It might also be seen as just a bit rude. Particularly the more nervous the speaker is, you might be more tempted to offer more points of information. Strategy is about allowing speakers to develop argumentations so that it can be effectively rebutted. It's possible when you have two very highly skilled teams that they can sort of, like jack-in-the-boxes, up and down, because there are three people on each side, so you don't have to be the same person up and down and up and down and up and down. But you can have debates where lots of points of information are offered, and it doesn't disrupt the flow of the debate, because the speaker making the speech is confident enough to say, you know what, this is fine. I can deal with this. I can say no, and I can carry on with my speech. Some debaters get very, very flustered, very, very nervous, and feel like they have to accept people who keep standing up. Who here has felt like that over the last couple of days, at all? Like on the first day? Who thinks they took too many points of information in all their speeches?
And the whole time or on the first day?
In the whole time. Has there been any of your speeches where you've taken too many POIs? Yeah, most people. I used to do it all the time. Like, people would keep getting up, I keep saying no, and they keep going, but point of information, and they'd get more and more aggressive. And I was like, all right then. Okay. So that's when we should make them. Yes, Kate?
Can I ask you something? What's, according to your opinion, more effective in debate, cross-examination or POIs?
Sorry?
What's more effective in debate, cross-examinations or POIs? You know, we've got debates with cross-examination and POIs, which is like more, like better way, according to you know, in comparison with.
I would say that points of information can be very, very useful, and in very, very close decisions can often mean the difference between winning and losing a debate, but only in very close decisions. If your points of information are amazingly good, and the rest of your speech isn't that good, they can even increase your score by 1 or 2 points, particularly your content and your strategy score, not so much your style score. If your speech is amazing, and your points of information are quite weak, you can lose a couple of points. But if your speech is amazing and your points of information are amazing, you're not going to get much extra credit because it doesn't do anything different to your speech. So they're important to show the engagement through the debate, but I think more important is to develop rebuttal arguments and things like that. Points of information can sometimes make a speaker go off the track and make it easier to rebut their arguments, but I think you should be more focused on how you're going to deal with arguments in a more developed way. You don't have the time to develop an argument in a point of information. We'll talk about forms of points of information and sort of highlighting arguments for later on, flagging them up later. Okay, so that's when we should be making points of information. When should we be taking points of information? Oh, hang on, last thing on that. You said not constantly up and down, up and down, up and down. And some people said yes. So what was their interpretation of the word constantly? Is it a different interpretation?
I didn't think, I'm not even like every time, just like this, I thought it was like often like.
Throughout the speech?
Yeah.
So yes, in that sense, you're absolutely right. That's why I didn't say that no was right or yes was right. You need to be thinking about offering a point throughout the speech. It's not enough just to say, oh, well, I've got to offer 2 points of information to each speaker, so I'll do it really quickly and then I'll sit down because I'm a bit tired. You know, I don't really do it. But some people do that. Again, because they've read the rules, but they don't understand why the rules are in place and what the spirit of those rules is. Yes?
What if you keep getting refused?
If you keep getting refused, then keep asking in the same polite, pleasant manner if you can possibly make a point. Okay?
But you
Don't get more and more aggressive because you get refused. It's bad style. It's much less likely to get you accepted. If somebody says, I always look slightly confused when I offer points of information, as though I'm the one who's having trouble. And I'm like, okay, on that, and that's what I say. All right, if that's true, and I just stop. Because then the speaker thinks that I'm not that sure about what I'm going to say. Then if I can come in with a really bang, punchy, hard-hitting point of information, it's going to be very effective. You get some people, somebody's got a pen, who do this. And it's like they want to have a duel with the speaker. You know, why don't you get out your gloves, slap him around the face and say, pistols at dawn, sir. That's not a point of information. That's scary. And the more they get refused, the more indignant they get. And you see them start to go red in the point of information. Yeah, I'm really going to take you now. People do that to me and I'm just like, calm down. And then I look like the reasonable and rational one. And they look very, very silly to the judges. Because one of the things about debate, as an overall thing, is when we're more calm and collected, people think that we're more secure in what we're saying. Creates an impression of, I don't have to be fazed by this because I know that what I'm saying is right. These people, woohoo, look at them. They're hysterical. Not in the funny sense, but literally they're in hysteria here. They don't know how to cope with my arguments. Look at the way they're reacting. So don't be more and more aggressive. A, it won't get you taken. B, it will count very badly with the judges. All right? So that's making points of information. When? When should we take them? After a major point?
When you're not in the middle of something, when you're in the middle of,
When you're not in the middle of a sentence. Who's done that already? Stopped what they were saying to say, all right, go on then. Don't do that. You are in control of your speech, of your time, and of the floor. You decide whether anybody else gets to speak or not. Say to them, I'll take you in a second. I'm going to finish this point first, then you can ask me something about it. Okay? Take them when you're pretty confident. Okay? When you've said something you know, you can defend. Because you will probably have to defend the point you have just made. All right? Don't take them when you've just made something up. When you've mentioned the report that doesn't exist. Just in case they know. And unless you're prepared to bluff it out and go, didn't you read it? It was published on the 24th of January. But generally speaking, if you're unsure about any of your data, or even if you're uncertain about your line of argumentation, it's possibly not the best time strategically to accept a point of information. It can highlight the weakness in your argument. So you want to be very, very careful about when you accept points of information. Space it out through your speech. Don't accept on the same point. Don't take a point of information when you're dealing with a point of information. I've seen debaters do that. They start responding to the point of information, they're giving their response to it, somebody else says, yes, but, and they go, all right then. Why would you do that? Ever? Like, everybody can see that that's a bad thing to do, right? Okay. Let's move on then to why points of information are important.
Because they can really throw the speaker off track and really and possibly get them into a situation where they say something that they regret.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can use that either as a rebuttal or in
Yep. They're important because they can throw the speaker off. More generally than that, that's why they're important for the person making the point, but more generally, why are points of information in debate important?
so like a check and balance system, like so if the speaker says something completely crazy, then
Again, that's why it's important for the person making the point, but just in the abstract. Then what stops debate just being public speaking?
Reply.
Yeah, it's engagement with the other side's arguments as you were making your own. Anybody ever watched the presidential debates last time round with Bush and Kerry?
I watched the primary
They weren't debates. They were people making individual speeches to an audience. And then the other person would have a go at making an individual speech to an audience. They didn't necessarily clash. Points of information show that it's more than just prepared argumentation, that you can think on your feet, both when you're making them and when you're taking them and responding to them. They show that we do more than just come in with our little case, present our little case, and then go home hoping our case still stands. Anybody can do that. Debating would be really much duller without points of information. The great debaters make points of information that totally undermine opposition's case, that totally swing the audience round. I'll give you a couple of examples of those later. One of them you'll be able to find on Tuna's World Debate blog. Okay? One of them is one of the finest points of information I've ever heard. And that's lucky, because I was the one giving it. So, and I'll tell you what it was later. But I had people come up to me, people I respect in debate. I had people come up to me and say, I've never seen anybody win a debate with a POI before. And it was a debate that we did in the International Debate Academy in Slovenia, and I was debating with Tuna against Loke, the debating monk, and against Neil Harvey Smith, the chair of the World's Council, and against Branko Maruzic, who was chair of the European Council. So there's some great debaters in that debate. And it was my point of information to the last speaker on the opposition. And all the audience just went, oh yeah. It was a great feeling, it really was. So that's about the only time this week I'm going to blow my own trumpet like that. Okay?
What was the point of information?
I'll tell you later. So in general, points of information are important because they're what distinguish debate from other forms of public advocacy. It shows that quick-wittedness that we want our debaters to have. It shows that willingness to engage with opposition arguments in the same way that rebuttal does. You don't just stand up and present two different cases in isolation, do you? In proposition and opposition. You need to talk about the other person's arguments. Points of information are another manifestation of that, okay? Now let's get back to why they're important for people making them. Because they throw the speaker off, because they disrupt the flow of that speech, because they take up the time, because they show that there might be flaws in their logic, in their reasoning, because they show that their data might not be as accurate as they claim, or that they might be presenting a certain statistic in a particular way. And that statistic can also be reinterpreted. All these things are important because they might introduce strong lines of argumentation that we want to develop later on. Because sometimes we might actually want to help the speaker be more clear about what they're saying. Why?
So we could make constructive arguments when we understand better.
Yeah. If you don't know what a speaker said, and you stand up in rebuttal and you say, well, I don't really know what they said, so I can't really rebut it. How's the judge going to view that?
Not
It's
good.
my fault.
Well, it might not be your fault. The judge might think, yeah, you're absolutely right, that speaker was really unclear and indistinct. I don't know what they said either. So I'm with you on that one. But how do you know? Until you've spoken to the judge, how do you know? If you stand up and say, I really don't know what they said, then difficult. Because if the judge does know what they said, and does think it's an argument that's worth rebutting, you've almost lost that debate before you started. So sometimes you don't have to say point of information. You might, particularly in the early stages of the opening government speaker's speech, if they propose a model and you really don't know what that model is, ask for clarification. Say point of clarification. Please, can you go over your model? Please, can you tell us what you are proposing? Because if you don't know, you can't do an effective opposition strike. All right? So that's the first three done pretty simply, isn't it? Did anybody think there was that much in those first 3 points? Shows just how important points of information are in debate. When we looked at the schedule, a couple of people said, whoa, 2.5 hours on points of information? Really? What are you going to talk about? And it's like, I'll be lucky if I finish. Because they are so intrinsic to what we do. Okay, let's get on to the really good stuff. And that's the how. How do we make a point of information? Very, very basic, first of all. How do we make a point of information?
You stand up.
You stand up. Why do you stand up? To get their attention. Put yourself on an equal footing, absolutely. Eye contact, eye level. And
No, that's it.
To be noticed
to be noticed by whom?
by both judge and speaker.
Judge as well as the speaker. The speaker will probably notice that you're saying points of information. But if I'm judging and I'm sitting there now, I'm doing this, and somebody says point of information, and I look up and everybody's still sat down, can I be sure who's offered that point of information? So who do I know how to give the credit to? Or who to give the credit to, rather?
You're supposed to say point of information or just stand up?
I do both. If you just stand up, and the speaker just waves you down, and I'm writing notes, I don't even know you got out of your chair. So you make it clear to both speaker and judge, I want to make a point of information. Don't do it like that, just say, point of information, or on a point, on that point.
I've seen people give their point of information, and instead of looking at the speaker, they turn around and look at the judge.
I've seen people do that as well. We'll talk about that when we talk about sort of style and effectiveness, but I'm talking more generally now in terms of how we make it. What form should our point of information take?
Some kind of question.
Question is good. What type of question? What type of questions are there?
Yes and no questions.
Which are known as closed questions.
Oh, then there's open questions where you
Right.
can sort of.
Closed questions invite a yes, no, or a specific answer. They're not always yes, no. What time is it is a closed question, but you can't answer it with yes or no. Try. What time is it?
Yes.
No.
See, that sounds ridiculous. Okay? So closed questions are ones that demand specific responses, but very, very short specific responses. If you ask a closed question of somebody in a point of information, how long are they going to spend responding to it? Yeah, they're going to say yes or no, we'll give you the specific information you want. Ask an open question. What other types of questions are there?
Oh, when I'm asking about the opinion of the people on the subject.
That's a quite open question. There are what we call optional questions. Either or questions, sometimes known as binary questions. Because you give the speaker a choice between two positions. My teachers used to do this to me all the time when I was in high school. Rhydian, you're either lying or you're stupid. Which is it? It's not nice to have to pick one of those two. So try and make the options you give your speaker as uncomfortable as possible. Do you or do you not agree that? Put them on the spot. But make them say something that they don't want to say if you can. Okay? Questions are good. Closed questions, not so good. Open questions, good. What about statements? Good or not good?
Depends on what.
Alex, you said good.
If effectively with a short statement, you can undermine the logic or like point out the flaw of their argument. I think short statements are very effective.
Short statements can be very effective. The example of X shows us that your argument is flawed. Deal with that.
Me actually, yes, if I can.
Yeah. I do that all the time. I often finish a point of information with, deal with that, please. Because it means that they've then got to start a whole new line of argumentation just to respond to my point. What I don't do is I make a factual statement. I don't stand up and say the Eiffel Tower is in Paris. They go, great, have a gold star for geography. Slovakia is a small country. It is. It's very true. Well done. Think about when you're making a point of information, it should be trying to add to your case as well as trying to throw the speaker off. In the context of the debate about nuclear power, if somebody said, you know, Slovakia manages to run everything, or Slovenia or wherever manages to run everything from just a couple of power generators, and the point of information is they're a small country, is that an argument against nuclear power? You need to say more in that point to say, but that's okay in a country where 2 power stations is sufficient. The more power stations you have, the more risk you have of one of them going wrong. That's exactly the same point, but made in a much more effective way. So the style of the point of information and the effectiveness of the point of information often go hand in hand. Okay? Asking questions, really, really good. Is it your contention that? Sometimes, if you're very, very good and you're very, very clever, you can ask a point of information that seems almost insignificant because you're trying to hide an argument in it that you're then going to bring out later. You don't want to give away your whole argument in case the opposing side recognise that and preempt that argument coming. So you ask them, quite innocuous question. Is it really your contention that X, Y, and Z? And if it's quite innocuous, they'll probably go, well, yes. And then you get to stand up in your speech and say, okay, I asked them a point of information about this. They clearly didn't understand the implications of what they were saying when they said yes, because, dun da da, big flourish, here's the rabbit coming out of the hat. Very, very effective way of doing it. But think about where you are on the table. The further you are down the table, the less likely judges are to see that as a legitimate tactic. If you're pulling rabbits out of the hat in the final speech, you're not giving the opposition much time to deal with that argument at all. Okay? So think about that in terms of the style. Also in terms of effectiveness, think about the way you take a point of information. How should you take a point of information? We've already said you shouldn't stop in mid-sentence and say, oh, go on then. You shouldn't feel badgered or barracked into taking the point. So how should you take it?
As politely as possible.
Yeah. Finish the point you're making and then say, now sir, I'll take your point, if you have one. Don't always say if you have one, but sometimes you can get away with a little cheeky. If you have a point, to suggest that maybe they're just going to say something frivolous. Okay? Often, yes.
When you're at the development point and someone stands up, it's a POI, do you have to tell them to wait until your point's over, or you can just go on with your speech and then take it?
You can go on with the speech and you don't have to say anything at all. That is allowed. I always think it's better if you acknowledge the fact that somebody has stood and say, I'll take you in just a moment, or I'll take you when I've finished this point, and then you can question me. The more calm and confident you are, again, it's about appearing in control of your speech. Don't stop what you're saying mid-sentence, but I think it's always polite just to say, I've recognised you're there. I hate it when somebody says, stay standing, talks for 2 minutes, and then turns around and says, and now sit down. But I've seen debaters do that. I've had that done to me. And it's not a nice feeling. It makes you very, very angry. Sometimes that can be quite effective, though, because an angry person doesn't sound very good when they stand up to speak. Because they go, all this rage comes out. So then their speech becomes less effective because I kept them on their feet for 2.5 minutes.
And they couldn't have anything said in those 2 minutes either.
And nobody else was going to stand up because they thought I was going to accept that person. So other people might have missed opportunities to offer points of information. Personally, I don't think that's good. I don't think that's legitimate. Because it's not, again, playing within the spirit of the rules of POIs. It's playing strictly to the rules of POIs and bending those rules to your specific advantage. I don't like debaters that do that. And as I've told you constantly, if the judges don't like what you're doing, then they're not going to reward you in close decisions. A lot of the time we go on our gut reaction and we do our rationalization afterwards. So making yourself as likable as possible when making and when taking points of information is a good thing. Did I tell you yesterday about the chap who stood up and said, I may be particularly dense? And the speaker just said, yes, you are, sit down. Now that was really funny when it happened. It really was. But again, I would penalise both people in that instance. I penalise the person offering the point of information for wasting his own opportunity and indulging in pointless, pompous rhetoric. I may be particularly dense. Well, great, good for you. You know, have a gold star. That and 50 cents might get you a cup of coffee. I don't know. But at the same time, I don't think the person accepting the point ever took a point of information. They didn't really engage with an opposition's arguments. Sometimes, and depending on the format of debating, points of information become very confrontational in that way. Offering a point of information with a question is often good. Accepting a point of information with a closed question can, in a show debate, in a public debate, again, be very, very effective. I did a debate in Edinburgh about legalising all performance-enhancing drugs in sport. Proposition made solid arguments about why they should do that. You can think of a couple of arguments why we should legalise things like steroids in sport.
Because it's the athlete's body, they should be allowed to do what they want, and
Yep,
they're the
okay,
ones.
that's one. Bodily integrity, bodily autonomy, the athlete. People put their body through extreme training anyway. This is really no different.
Everybody's already doing it.
Everybody's already doing it.
Yeah.
People are getting away with unfair advantage. Let's level the playing field
Yeah.
by saying it happens.
In a lot of sports like boxing, the whole point of the sport is just to watch huge muscly people beat each other.
Yeah.
Why not let
Better,
them
better
beat
competition, better.
Sport gets better when people take performance enhancing. I don't say it too loudly, but like the race for 70 in baseball a few years ago between Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa happened because Mark McGuire had been pumping steroids. Sosa less so. If you just look at the way their bodies are formed, you can see that McGuire was clearly, because McGuire's neck was getting as thick as his biceps. Look, Barry beat a block of bombs.
His head, in 10 years, his helmets has went up 4 sizes.
Yeah. His head grew. That's scary. Barry Bonds. I mean, some people say his baseball records are illegitimate. His home run record, because isn't he the all-time home run king now? He's taken over from Hank Aaron.
Season and all time.
Season and all-time. So he's taken over Hank Aaron, he's taken over from Mark McGuire as most of the season. That's pretty amazing. Some people say it's illegitimate. But the whole point of sport is to reach the pinnacle of physical achievement, right? If you can do that with performance-enhancing drugs, isn't that what people want to see? They want to see people run the 100 meters in 9.6 seconds if they can. As long as they're not doing it in a car, we don't mind. You know? We like to see people throwing things further, jumping higher. Performance-enhancing drugs help the spectacle of sport. They made all these really solid arguments. So what were we left with on opposition?
If you take a lot of like teenagers like really say, oh, they really look up to the athletes and they say, oh, you know, these guys are doing steroids, so I should.
Absolutely. The dangers of the influence, because when you take steroids as a teenager, any drug has more effect on a developing than on a developed body. We don't know the nature of the detriment. We do know that steroids increase rage and aggression in people. It's actually a documented condition. It's known as roid rage. You have road rage where people get stressed out from driving. Now we have a roid rage.
Yeah, I read a book about Barry Bonds and the whole topic.
People who go to the gym a lot, just normal guys who take a lot of that sort of protein, muscle building drink stuff, and then go home and beat up their girlfriends because they can't control their aggression anymore. It's quite horrific. The other thing we know is that steroids damage the heart muscle. But these were the only arguments. We had all the sort of practical, they've got rid of the, oh, you know, sport should be about individual excellence and drugs taint that. And those arguments weren't going to work when they'd already said it's about physical excellence in whatever way you can achieve it. You know, it's no difference to athletes going through endurance or altitude testing and changing their physiology in that way. So we needed to make the arguments about the dangers to health much stronger. So if you take a point of information with, what we say on side opposition is, steroid abuse is never good for your heart. Are you going to tell me otherwise? What's that person on proposition going to say? They have to say no. Because it's just a fact that steroid abuse is never good for your heart. But the moment they say no, you go, great, I've had your point, now sit down. They make a point that supports your argument. In some forms of debate, that's legitimate. In other forms, it's not. So when you're looking at taking a point of information, make sure you actually take it. I'm always careful about saying to people, as soon as you've heard enough of the point, tell the person offering it to sit down. Some people take that to mean, oh, I let them speak for 5 seconds, and whatever I've heard, I say shut up and sit down. That's not taking the point of information. And that's not legitimate. Okay? Take the point that is being offered and deal with it there and there. Who here has said, oh, I'll deal with that later when I get to my third point? I know some of you have, because I've heard you say it, so I should see more hands going up.
Right, 'cause I don't remember.
A couple of people have said, oh, that's coming in my third point, so I'm not going to deal with that now. Don't do that. Deal with it now. Say, well, I was going to deal with that in my third point, but you know what? I'm comfortable enough in my argument that I can flip my structure to deal with your POI, and I can still make a great speech. That's really, really good strategy. And good context. Judges are going to like you.
What do you do when you get to your third point then?
Hmm?
What do you do?
No, you move your third point.
Oh.
Say, okay, I was going to talk about that later, I'm happy to talk about it now, or I'll deal with that briefly now, but I'll reinforce it because it's the third point in my structure. Be prepared to flip your structure if necessary. Don't be so rigid. That shows that you are thrown by a POI. Also, they're called points of information for a reason. They should be to the point. Don't stand up and say, on what your partner said. Okay? That's not good. If the partner didn't take you tough, you missed your opportunity. You should have said something about it in your rebuttal.
What do you say if they ask a POI and you're the first speaker of the government and the second speaker, it's the point that the second speaker's going to make and you don't want to say the whole point because then they won't have anything to talk about?
They should have more than just that to talk about.
So you just do a quick answer and then say my partner will elaborate further?
If it's a point of information, how can they make a point of information about something somebody hasn't yet said in the debate?
Well,
They should be asking you about what you've just said in your speech, not about what your partner is going to say.
I get it. I guess it has to do with rebuttals too. Let's say you're the first speaker of the opposition, and it will take the argument from yesterday. The government says nuclear gas doesn't produce. Nuclear energy doesn't produce greenhouse gases, and I'm the first speaker of the opposition, but the second speaker of the opposition is the one that's talking about how uranium mining does produce greenhouse gases.
You need to deal with it.
Okay.
There's no point rebutting something half an hour later.
Okay.
Deal with it. Be more flexible in your speech structure. Be more confident in what your arguments are. As you're listening to the speech, say to your partner, look, I'm going to have to nick that argument, you have this one. Okay?
Okay.
Create the clash directly is always more effective. Better strategy and better content. And usually better style as well. You're going to get marks in all three areas for that kind of thing. But a point of information should not be referring to something you either said 5 minutes ago in your speech or something your partner might want to say later. Right? That's not a good point of information to make. So tell the person, if they're offering a point of information that seems irrelevant, say, look, not what I was talking about, here's an answer. If you want to hear more, wait until my partner actually makes that point, and then you can ask him a point of information about it. Show the judge that they're not listening to your speech. You shouldn't ever make a point of information that doesn't flow directly from what the speaker says. You shouldn't ever make a point of information that doesn't flow from what the speaker says. Sometimes that happens. Some points of information then become issues in a debate that never should be there. We had talk in yesterday's debate about cars and whether they could run on other fuels. It wasn't really relevant to the debate as a whole, was it? It was brought in as a point of information when somebody had just mentioned an oil crisis, because in the person offering the point's mind, it was oil equals petrol equals cars. So the point of information became about cars. There was then a lot of response dealing with the nature of cars and things like that. And the response should have been, you know what? Energy crisis is about more than just how you get to work. Use a bicycle. And then you move on. Dismiss irrelevant arguments. Okay? Legitimacy. And this is hugely important. I've already mentioned whether things are legitimate or not in the first place. But when I talk about legitimacy and how points are made, what do I mean? What am I talking about?
They make sense. Is it cohesive with the argument that the speaker's trying to make?
partly that, yeah.
So like the speaker said X, Y, and Z, and then for it to be legitimate, it needs to be brought up about what the speaker said.
No, that's partly it.
And does it make a, and does it, is it an opposite, is it like sort of a question slash rebuttal to what they said, or is it just like
Yes. Again,
like a
that's
clar-
partly it. That's not the whole thing about legitimacy. What I mean is, don't make the point without having been invited to. All right? Give you an example. Speaker is speaking about police brutality. Okay? Or making a point about police and the way they treat suspects. I'm going to write up 4 ways you can offer a point. I want you to tell me which is legitimate, which isn't. Okay, they've made a point that the police always treat suspects fairly. That's the point they're making. Sorry, that's why they're brutality. Is the first one legitimate? Yes, of course it is. Absolutely fine. We like that. We like that lots. Do that. Do it almost all the time. What about the second one? Equally. We like that one. What about the third one?
No, not so much.
Borderline, I'd say. You're trying to introduce your argument without having been accepted. But it doesn't really give it away. So let's put a question mark by that. I would say err on the side of caution and go for one of the first 2. Kate.
I've seen in parliamentary debate in Europe people offering points of information with some kinds of funny remarks, like on the point of absurdity that you are saying, and otherwise people accepting that point, saying things like, I think that your team would be doing better without you, so keep your point for yourself, and stuff, if it's legitimate, because people do it.
People do that. Most judges, particularly in most schools, don't like that. As you go further up the sort of levels of debating, the older people get, the more willing they are to be rude to each other. Because we think people can defend themselves better. But some people who are 15, 16 are super confident. Some people aren't. And so something like, on the point of absurdity that you just made, I once heard somebody say, and this is the most bizarre POI I ever heard, on ontological fallacies. Anybody know what the ontological fallacy is?
By the ontological argument, I'm trying to prove existence of God.
It's where you confuse is and ought. Because something is a certain way, doesn't mean it should be that way. Okay? But that is the classic ontological fallacy. Usually crops up in a philosophy called natural law, that there is always a natural or God-given idea of right and wrong. That because nature is this way, it is preordained to be this way. Like, it could just be nature and random chance, possibly. I don't know. I'm not going to go too much into sort of atheistic theories of natural law. But if they say, police always treat suspects fairly, and you stand up and say, on Rodney King, everybody know who Rodney King is?
Yeah.
No.
No?
No.
Very, very famous case. 6 members of the LAPD put on trial because they were videotaped beating a suspect in the street. It was a very, very famous case during the riot. It caused riots in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I read a book on it.
And who is Rodney King?
He was an African American.
Yeah.
He must be the
Yeah. He was dragged out of his car by 6 officers, all white, and not told to assume the position and not read his Miranda rights. Everybody knows the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Characterized by Arnold Schwarzenegger in the wonderful film Red Heat as, even scumbags have rights in your country, which is a wonderful phrase. But yeah, if you say on Rodney King, it's clear what point of information you're giving, isn't it? That you're going to talk about specific instances of police brutality. So that one is clearly not legitimate. Okay? That's what we call precursing the point. You've said your point before the speaker's even decided whether to accept you. Like on the ontological fallacy. Rodney King is possibly slightly worse than ontological fallacy. The reason that was such a weird POI is I think I was the only person in the room who knew what the ontological fallacy was at that point. So saying on ontological fallacies, the speaker thought they were being really clever. Everybody else in the room went, what now? Fallacies? Don't get it. So when you're making a point, don't start to make the point before you've been accepted. It's just not. The other thing about legitimacy is don't make points personal. Again, I'll give you an example of this. There were two brothers in Ireland. Made for very, very funny debates to watch, but they didn't do each other any favours. Because one would stand up and go, on a point of information, where did you get that haircut?
Well,
it's funny, but it doesn't add anything to the overall debate.
well, that's another fallacy. I think it's called ad hominem fallacy when I'm attacking one speaker
Yes.
instead of his argument.
Yeah, don't attack the speaker, attack the speech. Attack the arguments. Okay? Because judges will always see it as an illegitimate attack. If you're resorting to attacking the speaker, judges will assume it's because you can't attack arguments. So don't do it. And even less so in world schools than, for example, at varsity level. Varsity level, we're allowed a little bit more leeway because, you know, the philosophy is you're big enough and ugly enough, get over it. But that's legitimacy. Make sure that you are introducing nothing before you're accepted, that you are just saying, on a point, on that, sir, madam, information, anything like that is fine. Say it calmly, say it politely. If you want to do what I do and look a little bit sort of, okay, and just a little bit kind of, really? Honestly? Sometimes that's good. If you don't get accepted, don't go when you sit down. I hate it when people do that. I used to do that when I started debating, and it was about 4 competitions before a judge took me aside and said, Rhydian, I love the way you speak, but you're so bloody annoying. When you don't get taken on points of information, it's like, but you have to take me because I've got the best point. So just don't do it. And I said, but it's really annoying when people don't take the point you want to make. Or when people deliberately ignore you and go for somebody they think is weaker on your team. All right? Who should you take a point of information from? If all 3 members of the opposition stand up, who should you take a point from?
Person who thinks the weakest.
Really? Why?
Because then they'll have a worse question to ask.
Is that good strategy?
Depends on how confident.
When are you taking your point of information?
When I feel strong.
When you're most strong. So who should you then take?
Take this trial.
Take the person you think will give you the best challenge and beat that. Because if you can beat the best they've got to offer, nobody gets credit for knocking over a straw man. Everybody heard the phrase straw man before? Arguments that fall down when you go, okay? Nobody gets credit for that. Like I always said about Michael Moore, when he interviewed Charlton Heston in Bowling for Columbine, I found that one of the most offensive pieces of cinema I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of offensive cinema. Michael Moore managed to make an 84-year-old man with Alzheimer's look a bit confused. Well done, Michael. Bet you slept well that night, didn't you? The guy's got Alzheimer's and he's 84. Leave him alone. Borat. Everybody seen Borat?
Oh my God.
Cultural learning from a glorious benefits nation of Kazakhstan. He managed to make redneck racists look a little bit racist. Woohoo! Fireworks for you, Borat! There's no great skill in doing that. Similarly, there's no great skill in making a weak argument look weak. It's like when you're thinking about your strategy in your main speech. You don't spend a lot of time rebutting a weak argument, do you? Because there's no point. You deal with it and you move on. You want to spend most of your rebuttal tackling the big, strong arguments of the opposition, because those are the ones you need to take out if you were going to win that debate. Similarly with points of information, take the best you think you can get. If you can deal with that, you're going to be in an incredibly strong position come the adjudication. Everybody clear on that? Okay, last point then. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Somebody's just stood up, waffled on for 20 seconds of your speech, but pretty unclearly because they didn't think through how can I make this point of information clear, succinct, in 15 seconds. And you're going to say, you know what? Have another 20 seconds of my speech. That'd be good. No, don't. That's the only time where you say, look, I'm sorry, I just didn't get that at all. But only if it's genuinely muddled. Some speakers will be quite clear. You might not want to deal with the point. Don't run away from it. But if the speaker's like, okay, well, the thing is that, okay, what I wanted to say was, don't give them more time. They're eating up time you can be using to make arguments. So don't waste any more of it on them. Who here asked people to repeat a point? You going to do it again? No. Unless you understood every word and genuinely didn't understand the point, okay? But most of the time, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Is bad strategy. Because if you can't get what they said, and as I've already said, they should be thinking about, I need to be breaking this down into one sentence. If you're making a point, write it down. I don't want to see people stand up and go, the thing is, what I mean is. Okay? That shows me you haven't even thought about the point before you've been accepted. And that's bad strategy as well. Okay, now before we break, and then we get into our exercises, I'll tell you about the point of information. We're doing a debate about colonialism, and whether the House should apologize for colonialism. No, this was in Slovenia. Colonialism has nothing to do with Native Americans, in that sense. It's about ruling countries from afar. Okay? And I was on proposition. I was obviously very establishment British guy saying that Britain should apologize to most of Africa, indeed most of the world. Because if you look at old maps, all those pink bits, that's us. Singapore, India, lots of China.
Pakistan.
Well, there was no Pakistan before India became independent. Pakistan split from an independent India in 1948, and then Bangladesh split from an independent Pakistan. But lots of Africa, North America, Canada, Australia. You know, we owned 3/4 of the globe at one time. The expression, the sun never sets on the British Empire, because we owned so much of the world. And I was about the most British person in the debate, so they put me on proposition, just to make me uncomfortable. They then put a Singaporean guy on opposition, saying, no, colonialism fun. So we both had to make what were slightly counterintuitive arguments. And Loke is great. Tuna told you about Loke? Loke Wingfat, the debating monk?
A little bit.
This guy travels all over the world, taking debate wherever it is not. He's amazing. I literally, I'm in awe of the guy. I watch him teach. He's astounding. He really is. And he got up and he made a brilliant speech, totally unexpected, about the benefits that the colonized nations had derived from being colonies of Britain. About the infrastructures that we had left behind, like parliaments and railways and stuff like that. All real, practical, tangible benefits, when we'd made lots of airy-fairy moral arguments about, we were probably quite nasty. But we did, in practical terms, do an awful lot of good. The second largest political party in India right now is the Bring Back Britain party. The only unified language in India is English, because there are so many disparate languages. There are about 800 different languages on the Indian subcontinent. So the only official language that everybody speaks is English. Their parliamentary language is English, because Hindi is so tied up with the caste system. They have difficulties with using any of the indigenous languages. So there are tangible benefits, and Loke made a brilliant speech about these tangible benefits. And I needed to take out this argument. And we had been the first proposition team in the British parliamentary debate. He's second opposition, so I get no chance to rebut his speech. The only time I get to attack him is if he will take me on a point of information. And this idea that we hadn't been that bad, that in fact, these countries would be a lot worse off had they not been under British rule, had been running through the opposition bench. And nobody was taking me on a point of information. It was one of those, we know what you're going to say, we don't like what you're going to say, so we're not going to let you say it. And eventually Loke was brave enough, because I stood up on a point of information and I said, Loke, be braver than your teammates and take me on this. And he did. And I turned to the audience, and this is what you were saying about turning to the judge. I turned to the audience and I said, ladies and gentlemen, being thankful for some benefits that may have come out of colonialism is rather like being the victim of a hit-and-run accident, being paralyzed for life, working really hard so you can enter the Special Olympics, winning gold medal in a wheelchair race, and then going to find the driver who ran you down to say thanks for the opportunity. Because so much has been done to retard the development of those countries during the colonial period, that to say, well, we got a railway and a parliament out of it, whoopee, you know? As opposed to, we have a strong sense of national independent identity, which might have helped them even more. But I needed to make a point of information that the audience would find amusing, that was a little bit of a story, but that also was going to attack the central premise of the opposition case. I made that point and I said, isn't that true, Luke? And Luke stood there and went, yeah. And that was pretty much the debate done, there and then. And that's why people came up to me and said afterwards, we didn't realize you could win with the POI. I think that's possibly the finest thing I've ever said in a debate like that. I don't know where it came from, whether it was divine intervention, but it was good. The thing about that is, it's so rare that you are A, going to have that opportunity, B, that you're going to be able to think of the POI that you need to make that is that killer point of information. Okay? Most of the time, it's just going to be part of the to and fro of debate. So don't spend time focusing on this POI can win me the debate. It so rarely can. Also, that was a show debate, and I made my point for far longer than 15 seconds. Loke was incredibly indulgent in me because we were doing it for an audience. We weren't doing it to beat on each other. All right? So don't spend too much time trying to make a nice little rhetorical story. Most of the time, the debaters are going to go, you know what? If you've not got to your point yet, then I don't need to hear it. And that's perfectly legitimate for them to do. Last thing, if you're declining the point of information, please say something. Say, no thanks, it doesn't take that long. And no thanks is always nice. A very good friend of mine, a chap called Nick Sloboda, great debater in his day, from the Oxford Union. Never ever waved people down like that. I think that's just rude, to carry on making your speech and just flap your hand at someone. Like, what is this? It's just, it's independent movement coming from my wrist. I can't control it. I think A, it looks bad. I think B, it's downright rude to not acknowledge that somebody has stood. They've had the courtesy to say, on that point, sir, have the courtesy to say, not at this time, or in a moment, or no thank you. It doesn't take much out of your speech. It shouldn't ever really stop the flow of your speech, just saying no thanks. So take the time to do it, and you will be more liked by the judges after that crucial adjudication of who persuaded me, who did I like in this debate. Keep all those things in mind, guys. After the break, we're going to do some exercises. I'm going to ask for a very, very brave volunteer after the break. So while you're taking the break now for just 5 minutes, go to the loo, grab some water, something like that. Think about who's brave enough to stand up here, make a speech on anything they like, and accept every point of information that is given. All right? Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. You've been good this morning.